Hi everyone, this is Matthew Jana for Card Runners, and I'm here with a hand replayer. And today we're playing against an opponent where we have 200 hands on him, and everything about him makes him seem like he's a reasonably good player. So, of course, 200 hands is a very small sample, we don't know for sure, but he seems like he's playing aggressively, he's 3-betting often, everything about him makes it seem like he could be a good player, even though we don't know for sure yet. So we're probably going to treat him like he's a rig. So let's go ahead and start it off. So we're dealt ace, queen of clubs and under the gun. We open to $6. Every position folds except for the big blind, and I'm actually going to pause right here. So preflop is by far the hardest aspect of poker to really model, at least the hardest street. So it's very hard to say, like, in theory, what the big blind cold calling range should be against an under the gun open. These aren't ranges that I'm particularly experienced with, and I imagine most viewers also aren't very comfortable with these ranges, because it's just not all that often that under the gun opens, everyone folds, and the big blind calls. So recently, a lot of really, really good players have been advocating calling very wide in the big blind against opens. But when you're out of position and that's very difficult to play those hands, it's probably safe to say that this guy's range isn't all that wide. On one hand, it's going to be reasonably wide since he gets to close the action pre-flop, and he, is risking 4 and there's already $9 in the pot. But he's probably not calling crazy wide because a lot of the hands, which in theory might be a call, are going to be really, really hard to play. And I wouldn't advocate, especially at small stakes, trying to play out of position with really difficult hands to play. So it's tough to say exactly what his range is here, and it's probably like pretty wide, but not crazy wide. All right, so let's take a flop, and we get queen 6-7 with 2 hearts. Okay, so let's see what we do here. All right, so we bet $8. $8 is a pretty good bet sizing here, and it's probably about as big as I would want to bet. So there's a few things going on here. On one hand, I don't want to make our bet sizing so big that it's hard to get value after we bet all 3 streets. If we make a big bet, big bet, big bet, then our opponent might not call down with any hands or many hands worse than ace-queen because he's just able to fold so much of his range on each street. Yet by the same token, it's hard to say whether we should bet bigger on the earlier streets or bigger on the later streets, because betting bigger on the earlier streets charges our opponent when he has draws. He can easily have some flush draws or some straight draws here. But we might also want to bet a little bit bigger on later streets if our opponent has check called a few times, because then he probably can't have us beat. So for example, if our opponent check calls our flop bet here, we're going to know it's a lot less likely he has a set because a lot of people would check raise their sets on the flop. So it's very hard to say exactly how big we should bet on each street, but I would say I'm probably going to bet around the same amount on each street with ace-queen, and assuming the turn and the river don't come anything that drastically changes, the board texture, but I'm probably going to bet around the same fraction on each street, and I don't want to bet too big because I want to be able to still get value from weaker hands. So 8 seems just about perfect in my opinion. So he bets 8, that's good, and then we get check raise to 22 here. So right off the bat, I'm a little intrigued by this check raise sizing because it seems kind of small. We're risking $14, and there's already going to be 8 plus 22, which is 30, plus 13, $43 in the pot. So we're risking $14 when there's already $43 in the pot. That seems really cheap, and this board's also reasonably wet. Don't visualize this board as queen XX. It's not queen XX, it's queen 6-7 with a flush draw. The fact that there's a 6 and a 7 is very relevant because this under the gun range can have a lot of straight draws. So this is a really small check raise, and when he does something like this, I would at least take a note that, I don't like the sizing, which might now make me think he's not as good of a player as I originally thought. Okay, so a lot of times you talk about hands as bluff catchers. Here, yeah, our hand's technically a bluff catcher, but we block one of the overcards, right? An ace, if our opponent's check raise bluffing with something like ace-jack, he's tainted when the turn card comes in ace, and we have the backdoor flush draw. So the term bluff catcher doesn't work all that awesome on the flop, because even if our opponent's check raising a range that's mostly like sets, draw, and air, well, yeah, our hand loses to all of his sets, is ahead of all of his draws, but can be outdrawn, and beats all of his air. It's important to keep in mind we're blocking one of the overcards, and we have the backdoor flush draw. This is a very, very easy call. In theory, you're usually even going to have to call some hands you bluffed with on the flop, so much less a hand we value bet with. This is going to just be a trivially easy call. And we do call. And the turn is in 8 of clubs. So let's see what happens here. So our opponent bets 30. So when facing this $30 bet, I would not raise here. We have two. Raising can be good because it might make our opponent fold a draw or a call if he has some sort of like combo draw. But for the most part, we're too deep here. Our hand has showdown value, and we have a draw ourselves. So if our opponent's giving us a good price, I would rather just try to get to showdown and call here, which is what I imagine we do. Okay, cool. And this is also just showcasing why the term bluff catcher doesn't work that well. You know, we turned to flush draw, so now our hand's a lot better. Whereas if we had ace-queen off, we wouldn't have that ability. All right, cool. So that's pretty standard on the turn. Let's see the river. The river's an ace of hearts. Our opponent goes all in, not something I was expecting here. So it's 140 to call. The pot's about 120. The thing that's important to think about here is now our hand really is pretty much a bluff catcher. I don't think our opponent would ever be value betting with worse or a split. If our opponent is going all in with a split here, he's screwed up pretty badly. Because we could have turned the straight ourselves. We could have been slow playing a set. We have a bunch of, two pairs in our range. And we also could have just rivered the flush. So I think our opponent's either jamming with pretty much the nuts or air here. And if our opponent's jamming with the nuts or air here, it's really as simple as if you think he's bluffing too much, call. If you think he's bluffing too little, fold. That sounds boring. And people don't usually like that answer, but that's really what it is. You should have a bunch of hands in your range here that are theoretically indifferent to calling. Ace-queen's pretty much going to be one of them. So if we had a flush on the river, yeah, we're going to call. If we had somehow complete air on the river, yeah, we're going to fold. For most, everything else is a bluff catcher, and we should be indifferent. So there's no real correct answer here, and we don't have enough reads to know what to do. That said, exploitatively, I would fold. I don't think people overbet bluff nearly enough. I haven't played, to be honest, in quite a while, but I still talk to a lot of people who play, and people don't tend to overbet bluff enough, especially at this limit. And we can just have a ton of flushes here ourselves. So not only does our opponent have to be capable of overbet bluffing, but he has to be willing to bluff jam, a huge amount of money into a spot where he's just going to straight up run into the nuts sometimes. We sometimes will have just pocket aces on the river as top set that'll likely call. We can have a ton of flushes. So because of that, I don't think our opponent's going to be bluffing here nearly enough, and I would just fold. So let's see what he does. And we do fold. Okay. So I think this hand was well played. I pretty much would play every street the exact same way. We just got a turn card that made us get excited, and then we got a river card, which wasn't the best, and then we faced a jam, and we had to fold. So yeah, I think this hand was well played.